When it comes to mixing vocals, I have a 3-step process to add clarity to my vocal tracks. And if you're somebody that's struggling with this area, if you have vocals that are just too muddy or unintelligible or not clear in the slightest, well, this is going to be the perfect video for you as I break this 3-step process down. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy 5-Piece, producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out today's video. I'm really excited to break down this 3-step process to add more clarity to your vocals. I think this is going to help a lot of you guys out there because a lot of times when people are sending me mixes, this is one of the biggest flaws with their tracks. Their vocals are muddy, they're buried, they're not clear, they're unintelligible, and everything else you can imagine. So we're going to break this down specifically, but one thing that I do want to point out before somebody becomes hero in the comment section is this is really going to be focused on fixing problems that happened in the recording phase. So I'm not really going to talk about things that you should be doing in the recording phase, because ultimately if you do want to achieve a clear vocal, you have to handle that part well. However, sometimes you like what you did, even though it has all kinds of flaws, and you want to find ways to fix it. This video is going to be really focused on that specifically. However, it's not going to be foolproof. At the end of the day, you may need to consider re-recording your tracks, gain staging them properly, and doing the bare minimum stuff in the recording process to get to a level where you can then take it and enhance it further with some of these steps. That being said, let's break this down, and really this is going to revolve around 3 specific parts of a process. Now, the first part is compressing the vocal for consistency. The second part is going to be controlling low end, and the third part is going to be increasing certain frequencies for presence. Let's begin by talking about the first one, which is compressing for consistency. Now, I've got a track here, and you may recognize it from some of my past videos, but really I'm using 2 compressors, being an Alessia Impressor and a CLA2A, and I'm using them in series or serial compression. If you're unfamiliar with serial compression, I definitely recommend that you check out a video that I made all about it. I'm going to leave a link to that up above right now, but to give you the short and the skinny, I'm essentially using 2 compressors in series, so back to back, or in this case, almost back to back. I have one plug-in in between that I'm going to discuss in the next step. And what this is doing is the first plugin, this Alessia Impressor being the first one in the chain, is essentially catching the loud peaks and bridging the gap between the loud and the quiet stuff, while the second compressor is doing somewhat of the same, but it's really being used to drive up the overall level of the track. So why do I want to do this in the first place? Let's discuss that. Well, vocals in and of themselves are very dynamic, right? They're loud and they're quiet at different times depending on the artist's performance, and sometimes certain phrases or words might get lost in the process. Well, that's not always good, right? Because ultimately, if we want to have a clear vocal, well, then the listener needs to be able to hear everything and make sure that it's intelligible. So we're ultimately compressing this to make sure that you could hear everything fairly clearly, and then from there, we can go ahead and enhance some more stuff, right? And sure, you might be thinking, well, why don't I just use volume automation and gain staging? That stuff is good, but it's not always enough, and sometimes if you want to do something fast and dirty, so to speak, quick and dirty, you want to use a compressor because you can essentially achieve what volume automation achieves, but in less steps, right? You may, of course, want to stack it with volume automation. I'm not discouraging that, but I'm just sort of pointing it out. Now, in this particular case, my Alessia Impressor, I have a slow attack, a fast release, a 2-to-1 ratio, and about 3 dB of gain that I'm adding, right? And I have my threshold set up so that I'm losing upwards of 4.5 dB, but I'm more traditionally losing about 3 dB on average. So essentially, the very loud stuff is getting reduced, right? Anything that's extremely loud, any phrases or words that we're saying in the song are just getting compressed and reduced. And then there's going to be quieter parts that are not loud enough to get compressed at all. And what happens is those quiet parts, they're benefiting from this volume, this gain being added. And then at the same time, anything that is getting compressed is also benefiting. It's turning that stuff up after the fact, right? So again, we're using this Alessia Impressor to catch the excessive peaks, reduce them before we go into the final part, which is the CLA2A, and the CLA2A is set up the same, where we're losing upwards of 1 to 2 dB, so a much more gentle reduction, so to speak, but then I'm adding about 3 or 4 dB to really drastically drive the volume up, right? So let's actually just put this in. And what I'll do is I'll play it one time through and I'll put just the compressor in, followed by the CLA2A so they're combined, and I'll let it run and then I'll bypass both so you can hear what it sounds like with and without each of these steps, okay? So just the compressor, here we go.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all.
So you can hear there's quite a significant volume difference that's happening when I put this in. And that's exactly what I want, right? I want to bring the vocal up and more forward, make it a lot more, loud and clear in the same time. But at the same time, when I do this, it's going to start to expose certain problems that I'm then going to want to address. And that actually leads us right into the second part of this process, which is to control the low end. Now, the way that you control the low end on a vocal is really in a few different ways. But the way that I'm doing it in this particular track, at least at first, is I'm using a multi-band compressor. You can ignore this top part. We're really going to focus on this lower part, which is focused on the 30 hertz to basically 412 hertz, right? So the excessive low end. And we're going to be using this to basically take these lower frequencies and bring them down, but only when they become too much, too loud. And the way that it knows if it's too loud is based on the threshold here, right? Whenever the signal passes the threshold, this compressor is going to kick on and turn things down. I have a fast attack, a pretty fast release, and about a 4-to-1 ratio, and my range is set to 6 dB. That's the most amount of volume we can lose. But when I play this, you're going to see that I'm losing upwards of about 3 dB. So I'm only losing 3, not 6, even though that's the max. And it's just going to really smooth things out. And as you can see, I have it actually wedged in between my CLA and my compressor. That's because when I put the compressor in, I felt like it just brought out these lower frequencies a little bit, which is pretty common. And then obviously I'm really driving the volume up with the CLA. So I'm putting this Pro MB in between to really control that low end. And I'm going to continue to control it in later steps, but this is how I'm doing it here. Now, before I play it, I do just want to mention that another way to control this area is to use either a dynamic EQ set up very similarly, which I also like. Basically, the dynamic EQ and the Pro MB are probably the most transparent because it'll only get rid of the problem when it becomes a problem and otherwise leave the vocal untouched. That's important because this low end, while it can be responsible for muddiness and a lack of clarity, that's why we're dealing with it, it's also responsible for presence and warmth. So we don't want to totally kill it, right? Now, another way that you can process this or handle this problem is to also use a filter, right? So basically filtering out to a certain range. However, if I were to filter out up to 412 like I did here, you would have a very thin vocal. That might work for an ad lib or something stylistic that you want to do, but you really don't want to have a thin vocal. If your vocal is going to be a lead, you probably want to avoid that, and that's why I'm using stuff like the Pro MB or even a dynamic EQ. So with that in mind, let me actually just play this really quick in AB with and without the Pro MB, and then I'll talk about one other thing that I'm doing to control the low end later.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours.
So you should hear that it's just a little bit smoother, right? Like if I don't have it in, you got a little bit more of the pronounced low end, which is not the hugest deal in the world, but it is just creating a little bit of muddiness, and that's ultimately what I'm taming here. So I'm basically controlling the low end to reduce the muddiness, reduce the presence of these low frequencies, these bass frequencies, which are responsible for making a vocal sound less clear, less intelligible, etc. And then by doing this, I now prepare it for the next phase, which would be increasing the presence. Before I get to that though, let's talk about some other steps that I did to control the low end. I've got this EQ on, and this is happening after my CLA, so this is the last plugin in the chain so far. And I'm going to ignore these top two bands because that has to do with the next step. But down here, you see that I actually am using a filter. I'm filtering out about 70 hertz on the low end. And I'm also getting rid of about 1.14 dB at 110 hertz. So basically, this is really the low end as well. And with these two steps, I'm also really taming this low end, once again, taming that muddiness and allowing the vocal to sound more high end. It's essentially going to reduce the lows and at the same time give you this impression that the high end is coming up even before I've done any kind of boosting. However, as you're about to find out in the next step, there is some boosting taking place that also just offsets it and really makes this vocal sound high-end and pristine. Let's talk about that now. So as I mentioned, this third step now that we're talking about is increasing frequency presence. And we're doing that, of course, with an EQ specifically. And there's really two ways we want to go about this. The first is you want to boost basically the fundamental of the vocal, specifically where the intelligibility lives. And this is around 3000 hertz usually. Of course, it's going to depend on the vocal and the sound of the vocalist, where their voice really lives on the frequency spectrum. And the other way that we want to add to this is we want to add some top end air or presence. This is going to give you, again, that airy sound, some more shine, some more high-endy kind of feeling, hi-fi sound, right? A lot of different ways to describe this, but by doing that, again, it's going to offset the lower cuts that we did or the lower frequency reductions that we did and give your track the illusion that it's very, very high end. Now, what I'm specifically doing on this track is I'm boosting 3.2K, which is very much in line with what I said previously. And I'm adding about 1.62 dB to that. So that's right in that 3000 kind of pocket, increasing the intelligibility of a vocal. And by the way, if you want to actually enhance this even more, go into any sound that is conflicting with the vocal and reduce this range. So if 3000 is roughly where you're boosting, see what happens if you reduce that a little bit on a clashing sound, maybe a piano or another vocal or something else that's happening at the same time. And you might find that that actually makes the vocal even more intelligible. But I'm doing that here. And then on the top end, I have a shelf. So I'm basically increasing the entire high end. And I'm specifically increasing from 16 kilohertz and above. And I'm adding about almost 5 dB, 4.82 dB. It's quite a significant boost, but you're going to hear how that's really offsetting the low end that I was talking about. So let me play this now. I'm going to leave my filter in, but I'm going to just bypass this EQ section and put it in. And you're going to hear how much of a difference this is specifically making.
I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all. I don't know what to say, just pass the J up on the left side. These days these people talk, they quick to tell you what's on their mind. Problem is I don't care, what's mine is yours, I share it all. And I can't call it, but ain't stopping till I got it all.
So you should be able to hear how much clearer this vocal is now sounding because of these moves that I'm making. Now, one other thing that you can do to increase presence on a vocal is you can actually add some saturation. If I'm being honest, this is really more focused on the presence of the vocal rather than the clarity. This may not necessarily make your vocal more clear, but it could help. But it definitely is going to make it more present in the track. That being said, I'm not really going to talk about that in this video. If you want to see this at a more in-depth scale, I'm going to leave a link to a video all about vocal saturation and how to use it in your own tracks. Definitely click and watch that. And if you haven't already watched my melodic rap mixing vocal chain video, definitely check that out. I'm actually breaking down this specific song, every single plugin that's in it, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking as I went about it, and all that stuff. I think a lot of you guys will get value out of that. So I'm going to leave a link to that above as well. And by the way, any videos that I've mentioned, I'm also going to leave in the description below. So don't worry if you miss them throughout this video. But that being said, I hope you got value out of this video. If you did, please smash that like button until it turns blue. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell notification, so that way YouTube will notify you every time I drop a new piece of content. I drop something new every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. If you want help with these areas, definitely subscribe to the channel so I can help you with that. I appreciate y'all for watching. If you want to see anything in a future video, leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you then. All right? Peace, guys.
5,